I cruise to Alaska almost every year, and by now I consider myself an expert cruiser in the area. However, there are a few things I wish I knew before I sailed to Alaska for the first time. If you're planning a cruise to the last frontier, you'll want to know these 7 tips to make your cruise experience the best it can be. Let's get started. I took my first Alaska cruise in 2021. Since then, I've taken 6 cruises to the last frontier. I love everything about cruising to the state, whether the majestic views, quaint mountain towns, or nature-focused shore excursions. Since I've now taken 6 Alaska cruises, I can say with certainty that there are a few things I wish I knew before I went on my first Alaska cruise. From packing proper footwear to picking the right dinner time on my ship, just a few minor decisions could have made my Alaska cruise go by more smoothly. First off, don't bring mesh tennis shoes. I traveled with my dad on my first cruise to Alaska, and he packed a trusty pair of tennis shoes. These had a mesh exterior, which are great for being breathable, but unfortunately they are not good in wet conditions. When packing for an Alaska cruise, it is crucial to bring a comfortable pair of shoes. Many passengers spend their port days walking around historic towns and hiking near glaciers, so you'll want to bring suitable footwear for the trip. However, you want to ensure that your footwear is water resistant. Popular sneakers with a mesh exterior might be comfy, but they do not fare well with Alaska's rainy weather. As my dad and I explored port, his feet were cold and wet almost immediately after disembarking. Rainwater quickly seeped through the mesh lining of his shoes, leaving his socks wet and frigid. Even a small puddle could quickly ruin your port day. My water-resistant Adidas sneakers, though, and my pair of boots were far more adequate for visiting Alaska. Had I thought about this before my cruise, I would have told my dad to pack more appropriate footwear. And speaking of the weather, another thing I wish I knew before my first Alaska cruise is that it might be warmer than you think. Before I cruised to Alaska, I assumed the weather would always be slightly cold. I packed nearly every sweatshirt and jacket I could find in my closet, but neglected to bring items like short-sleeve shirts and shorts. My first Alaska cruise was in October, which is arguably the worst month to cruise to Alaska. It rained nearly every day, but I kept warm in my thermal layers and waterproof jacket. Since it was cold on this cruise, I naively thought that my upcoming Alaska cruises would also be cold. But when I cruised to Alaska in June on a Princess cruise, the days were long, sunny, and much warmer than I expected. Even though temperatures were hovering just over 70 degrees, it felt more like 90 degrees in my long-sleeve shirts and pants. While walking around Skagway, my sister and I could not help but laugh at how unprepared we were for the sweltering heat. Next time I cruise to Alaska, I'll definitely pack a few short-sleeve shirts and maybe even a pair of shorts. Another thing I wish I knew before my first Alaska cruise was that a much-anticipated glacier day might not happen. Most Alaska cruise itineraries include a glacier viewing day, during which your ship sails around one of the state's scenic glaciers. This is a major highlight of visiting Alaska for many passengers, many of whom might be seeing a glacier for the very first time. On my first Alaska cruise, I was looking forward to visiting Dawes Glacier, but rainy weather and patches of ice blocked our ship from a safe approach. Even though we still technically saw a very faraway glimpse of the glacier, I was disappointed we couldn't get closer. Later, on my second cruise to Alaska, our visit to Hubbard Glacier was canceled due to unfavorable weather conditions. Hubbard Glacier was supposed to be a highlight of my one-way port-intensive itinerary, so I was very bummed when I couldn't visit. Of course, weather is something cruise lines cannot control. Even though I felt disappointed, I knew it was for the best to call off a glacier visit in order to keep guests and the ship safe. Fortunately, on subsequent visits to Alaska, my ships completed their scheduled glacier visits without any issues. Nonetheless, I wish I knew how unpredictable these glacier visits could be before my first Alaska cruise. Another thing I wish I knew before cruising to Alaska is that excursions are expensive. You can still have fun without them, but they could be worth the splurge. Shore excursions on any cruise can be expensive, but especially in Alaska. Booking a whale watching tour might cost around $200 per person. Bucket list excursions like helicopter tours to glaciers are priced even higher, sometimes over $600 per person. I'm a budget cruiser, so I usually skip booking shore excursions. By doing just a little research ahead of time, I can almost always plan a fun day in port on my own. When I cruised to Juneau, for example, I visited Mendenhall Glacier on my own instead of booking a tour through Royal Caribbean, saving me nearly $50 in the process. Yet when I think back to my first Alaska cruise, I wish I could have told myself that it is okay to splurge on that extraordinary excursion, even if the price tag seems shocking. My dad and I considered booking a whale watching tour, but we ultimately decided against it to save money. Looking back now, I wish that we would have booked the excursion to make even more memories together. For most cruisers, visiting Alaska is something they'll do only once in their lifetime. Some excursions are totally worth the splurge in order to dive deeper into Alaska's nature, history, and culture. I also wish I knew about luggage valet, as it makes disembarkation day so much better. I distinctly remember carrying my jam-packed, nearly broken suitcase through Seattle's cruise terminal on disembarkation day of my first Alaska cruise. Had I known about luggage valet, I would have had a much more relaxing disembarkation day. If your Alaska cruise returns to Seattle, you can take advantage of Royal Caribbean's luggage valet service, which works in partnership with Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. Passengers who book this service receive their airline boarding passes and luggage tags in their stateroom the day before disembarkation. Later that evening, the luggage is taken from outside their cabin's door, where it is delivered to the airport and onto their flight the next day. I just used this service on my most recent Alaska cruise, and it was incredible. I put my suitcase outside my door at 10 p.m. on the night before disembarkation, and I didn't see my suitcase until I arrived at my home airport. The convenience of luggage valet cannot be understated, and I wish I knew about this helpful service on my first cruise to Alaska. I also wish I knew that the Gulf of Alaska can be rocky. For my second cruise to Alaska, I booked a port-intensive itinerary that started in Vancouver, Canada, and ended in Seward, Alaska. These itineraries allow passengers to visit more ports in Alaska compared to a round-trip sailing. Plus, many choose to extend their vacation in Alaska's interior, visiting places like Denali National Park and Preserve and Anchorage. To reach Seward from Southeast Alaska, where the majority of the cruise takes place, ships must traverse the Gulf of Alaska. I wish I knew how rocky this body of water could be before I sailed. As my ship crossed the Gulf, I felt nauseous and miserable. The ship rocked substantially throughout the day, and my cabin mate even fell ill. Luckily, a few motion sickness pills in the day made me feel much better. Had I known about this before, I would have taken the seasickness remedies in the morning to avoid wasting half of my day on board. And the last thing I wish I knew before I sailed to Alaska for the first time was that I should book a later dinner time. Eating dinner in the main dining room is a staple of any cruise experience, but I wish I knew to pick a later dinner time for my Alaska cruise. As your ship sails away from any of Alaska's ports of call, you'll be rewarded with unbeatable views. Sailing away from Skagway, for instance, involves a multi-hour passage through the Lane Canal, where astonishing mountains surround both sides of the ship. Most ships leave port sometime between 5 and 7 p.m., although some port days may differ. Regardless, if you book an early seating time in the main dining room, sail away could occur at the same time as your dinner reservation. I booked the earliest dinner time on my first few Alaska cruises, but I later regretted this decision. Now I select a flexible dining time or I reserve the latest seating available, so that way I don't miss out on any epic sailaways. So after 6 Alaska cruises, these are the things I wish I knew before my first or second Alaska cruise. Have you cruised to Alaska before? If not, you should probably follow my advice so that way you have the best cruise possible. If you like this video, please subscribe to our channel and turn on those bell notifications so that way you are notified every time we post a new video. Until next time, happy cruising!